The Orioles are still trying to decide who is going to jump in and claim one of these 4 open spots in the bullpen. But it seems like recently Mike Baumann might be stepping in to claim one of those roles. We'll talk about that and answer your mailbag questions coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, March 12th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we are going to take a look back at a televised and stat-casted spring training game on Monday with the Orioles falling to the Yankees, but we got a lot of good data, give you the 5 things you need to know from that one. And then going to be answering some mailbag questions on the final 2 segments of today's show, talking a bit about where the Orioles bullpen is headed with those open spots, what the O's should do if they need to add a reliever from outside the organization, and much, much more. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonmlb and use code all lowercase LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. So we start today's episode with a look back on the Orioles spring training game on Monday. Now, I'm recording this here on Tuesday evening, and they did play on Tuesday. It was a wild spring training game. They beat the Rays 12-8. Tyler Wells had a nice start. The Orioles mashed the baseball, Gunnar Henderson, Colton Cowser, and others. But there was no video feed, no StatCast, not even a radio feed. So basically, we have little to nothing to go off of. I'm not going to break down a game that I didn't see or have no data for. So the Orioles hit a lot. Tyler Wells pitched some innings. That's good. And they won. That's what I've got for Tuesday's game. But for Monday's game in Tampa against the Yankees, it was broadcast on Yes. It was broadcast on Masson. And we got the StatCast data. That is truly what you want out of a spring training game. And you don't get it, especially with the Orioles, nearly as much as you should. But I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles' 5-3 spring training loss to the Yankees on Monday. And the first thing you need to know is Jackson Holliday had 2 more hits. And these weren't the screaming line drives he has been hitting over the past week or so. But Holliday went 2 for 3 with a couple of singles, an RBI, and a strikeout, and got his OPS up to 957 in spring training. Now, the first hit to lead off the game was a little dribbler that just barely stayed foul down the third baseline for an infield hit. You're not going to take away much from that. But the second one was a line drive up the middle. Now, it wasn't hard hit. It was only 84 miles per hour in terms of the exit velocity, but he found the outfield for a base hit, got him an RBI. And what was really impressive in that first inning was once he got to second base, it was first and second with nobody out for the Orioles in that first inning, and right-handed pitcher on the mound, left-handed batter at the plate with nobody out, and Holliday timed up the pitcher. The starter, I believe, was Will Warren on Monday, who is looking like the Yankees' 6th starter right now. But if Garrett Cole is injured, he might win their number 5 spot out of spring training. Of course, if the Cy Young winner's out, the Yankees look a lot different, and we'll, of course, keep our eye on that. But Holliday timed him up and basically stole third on the pitcher. And the reason why I mentioned it's a left-handed batter, it is so much harder to steal third base when there is a with a left-handed batter up, because the catcher has a clear lane to throw and look at third. When there is a right-handed batter up, the catcher has to make a drop step and go behind that batter to make the throw. And that split second sometimes is the difference between out and safe at third. There was a lefty. It didn't matter. Holliday stole the base. That was pretty impressive for him. And he continues to just push forward. We don't know at this point. It could go either way in terms of whether or not he's on the opening day roster, but at this point, give him a spot. Give the kid a spot and let him go out there. Second thing you need to know from Monday's spring training game is that Julio Teheran got the start on TV and just was not as advertised. Now, it's not about, fully the results. No, they weren't great. It was 2 1/3, 4 runs, 3 hits, a strikeout. The issue was 3 walks allowed by Julio Teheran in that game. Teheran with the Brewers last year, when he kind of filled in at the back end of that rotation, and did a pretty nice job. Through 71 and 2/3 innings, mostly as a starter, but a little bit in relief as well for Milwaukee last season. He walked only 13 batters in 71 and 2/3 innings. It was a minuscule 4% walk rate for Julio Teheran. So then come out in spring and walk 3 batters and only record 7 outs is a little bit of an issue. Now, again, you're not really going off spring training results. You're looking more at process. And you're also looking at, okay, how do the command of the pitches seem? Was he walking guys because he was toying with a new pitch? Was he walking guys because he was nibbling? Or was he struggling with the command? And it didn't sound like or look like Teheran was toying with any kind of new pitch. And one of the walks early was because he was nibbling, and the 2-2 pitch could have been called a strike. And the 3-2 pitch also could have been called a strike. And they were both borderline and both were called balls. But the next 2 walks were like, he threw a 3-2 pitch that almost hit the batter in the left-handed batter's box. And then the other one wasn't very close either. And so we start to worry a little bit, because if the Orioles are planning to put Julio Teheran on the roster, of course, veteran righty who they signed to a minor league deal with a big league invite a couple of weeks ago and is competing for maybe like a long reliever spot as starting depth as well in the Orioles opening day roster. One of his big calling cards last year was he didn't walk anybody, kept the ball on the ground, and he limited some runs. If he's going to walk guys, his stuff is not what it was 5, 6, 7 years ago when Teheran was, the opening day starter 6 years in a row and the ace of the Braves staff. Like, that's not the pitcher he is anymore. So how he makes up for that is changed his pitch mix and just stopped walking people. If he walks people, you have much more of an issue. And because of that, in this outing and how it looked, again, I watched the outing, he only got 1 swing and miss on 22 swings by Yankees hitters. Again, that's not his game. He's not a strikeout guy anymore, but you'd like to get more than the 1 swing and miss on 22 swings. You'd like your stuff to be playing a little better than that. The velo wasn't great, although it hasn't been the last couple of years. Kind of a concerning start, mostly, honestly, for Julio Teheran. I mean, I don't think the Orioles need him, but for his sake of making a team this year, that was a tough look, and that takes him down a rung in terms of his chances, I think, to make the opening day roster. But on the flip side, somebody that continued to up their chances was Mike Baumann on Monday. And I am getting closer and closer. I've mentioned, since the Means and Bradish news, where we're most likely going to move Cole Irvin and Tyler Wells into the Orioles rotation, that basically meant there were 4 open spots in the bullpen. I've pretty much admitted, hey, as long as he stays healthy, at this point, I'm ready to say Dylan Tate is a 5th lock in the bullpen. That's along with Craig Kimbrell, Ynier Cano, Cionel Pérez, and Danny Coulombe. I'm willing to put Tate in as that 5th lock. I am very close right now to giving a 6th lock out of the 8 spots to Mike Baumann in the Orioles bullpen right now. Now, it helps him that he is out of options. So if the Orioles had him not make the team, they'd put him on waivers and he would 100% be claimed by another team and put in their bullpen. The O's do not want to lose Mike Baumann once a big-time pitching prospect and a guy they think can still help them out of the bullpen. But the big spring is going to do huge, because you're not just keeping him on the roster not to lose him. You're putting him on the roster because you feel like he's one of your best 8 relievers, and that is where Baumann is right now. He went an inning and 2/3 scoreless, hitless, 2 Ks, 1 walk. Velo was up. He was sitting 97 up to 98 miles per hour with the fastball, 6 whiffs on 10 swings against the Yankees hitters. I mean, the stuff was absurd. It looked crisp. The breaking balls were good. I saw him throw a couple of just ridiculous changeups as well, which could really be a difference-making pitch for Baumann against left-handed hitters this year. I was really impressed. He's gone 4 2/3 this spring, scoreless, 1 hit, 5 Ks, and 1 walk. He's been good, but it's not about the results. It's more about how the stuff has looked. And Mike Baumann, he was good in the first half last year. He was a reliable reliever. He fell apart in the second half, and that's why he ended the year in AAA and not on the Orioles playoff roster. He looks like first half Mike Baumann, but a step up from that right now. And that is really, really nice to see in March. 4th thing you need to know from Monday's spring training game is that Connor Norby has just come out firing since finally getting into Grapefruit League games. He was out for about a week, had some soreness in his side. Orioles held him out just to be safe. But sometime last week, he got back on the field, and I mean, he's hitting over 400 since. It hasn't been many plate appearances, but he goes 2 for 2 coming off the bench in the game on Monday. Had a couple of singles, had an RBI. Both singles were really good swings. One was a ball that he hit off the wall in right field, just hit it so hard off the wall and it bounced so far back that Norby stayed at first for a single. Other one was a crisp line drive up the middle. Both balls were hit. They were hard hit balls, 99 miles per hour off the bat for their exit velocities. Norby looks healthy, looks like the side's not bothering him. I mean, we know he has the bat. That's never been a question. That swing is looking better and better. It's just more of a question about where can the O's fit him in, and we'll get to that later on this episode. But the fifth and final thing you need to know from the Orioles spring training game on Monday is that Samuel Basallo, the Orioles' #2 prospect in their system, the teenage catcher, made his big league spring training debut on Monday. He was in minor league camp all of last year. And then this year, he had been dealing with a stress fracture in his right elbow, his throwing elbow. So the O's had shut him down from throwing, shut him down completely for a little bit. But then they kind of said, okay, he can hit. The swing looks good. So we're going to keep him hitting, and we're going to try to DH him in some spring training games. Well, he came in as a pinch hitter at the DH role in the 8th inning on Monday, grounded out, and he came back up. Actually, it could have been a cool moment. He got a second plate appearance, came up with the bases loaded and 2 outs in the 9th with the Orioles trailing 5-3. A hit could have tied the game. Got a hanging breaking ball on 2-1, put a good swing on it, hit it the other way, but hit it right to the left fielder for the final out of the game. But I thought a good swing by Basallo. Listen, he's 19 years old. It would take a lot, an incredible year from him to see him in the big leagues, I think, at any point in 2024. But at some point next season, he's going to be a star for the Orioles, and it's nice to see him back in big league spring training and just to get some eyes on him before he starts his minor league season. But again, nice to have the broadcast and the StatCast for the O's. Next time we'll get that is actually this Thursday. We will get it twice. Orioles and the Pirates, they play a normal game during the day, and then they have the spring breakout game in the evening, which will be televised as well, where it's all prospects playing against each other, something cool MLB is doing. So we'll of course recap all of that on Friday's episode. But next up, you've got questions. I'll try to have answers. We're opening up the mailbag for the final 2 sections of today's episode, and we will get to that coming up right after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks right now is my favorite way to play daily fantasy sports because, yes, football season is over, but that doesn't mean the fantasy season is over. It's the tournament season. It's playoffs potentially in the NBA, in the NHL. You got the college basketball tournament coming up. It's champ week right now, one of the best weeks in sports, and there is a whole lot going on in the world of college basketball right now. And that's where I want to focus on Prize Picks. Basically at Prize Picks, you just pick more or less on anyone's stat line. It's just more or less for a certain player, whether it's points, whether it's rebounds, whether it's assists, whatever it may be. It's just more or less. It is truly that simple. And I am going to go with, let's go with Ryan Nembhard. Gonzaga versus St. Mary's in the WCC championship game on Tuesday night. 10.0 rebounds and assists. I'm going to go less for Ryan Nembhard. I think St. Mary's can kind of shut him down a little bit in that game on Tuesday night. But you can just download the app today, use code LOCKEDONMLB, and get a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that is code LOCKEDONMLB on the Prize Picks app for a deposit match up to $100. It's Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. So on the rest of today's episode, wanted to open up the mailbag. And thank you all for sending in your mailbag questions, kind of on short notice, but I appreciated it all the same. I kind of asked for mailbag questions during the day on Tuesday and then recording here on Tuesday evening. Don't worry, we will do at least 1 and probably 2 more mailbags before we actually get to opening day. So if you did submit a question and it is not answered today, get to it in a future mailbag. If you want to submit a question, tweet at me at Locked On Orioles. You can put it in the YouTube comments right here. And of course, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. And also you can email me. That's lockedonorioles@gmail.com with your mailbag question. So basically, just kind of pulling up the tweet here. I asked for please send mailbag questions and going to run through some of my favorites so far. And we'll start with a question from David who asks, with so many prospects set to debut this coming season, which is going to be true again for the Orioles, do you think the Orioles will still have a top 5 farm system this time next season? I'm actually going to say no. Now, I still think it's going to be top 10, and it's still going to be one of the best in baseball. But once you graduate Jackson Holliday, Heston Kjerstad, Colton Cowser, most likely this season, you kind of go down a step. Now, you may have Samuel Basallo as the number one prospect in baseball, and that could carry this thing. And you may still have Coby Mayo and Connor Norby potentially as prospects. But here's what I think might happen. I think you'll have Basallo still. I think you might trade Connor Norby, and I think Coby Mayo might spend enough time in the big leagues this year where he graduates too. And so you get to that point where you're losing Holliday, Cowser, Kjerstad, Mayo, Norby. It's a lot of guys in like your top 6. You add that to the fact that the Orioles, hopefully, well, not hopefully, we know where they're picking the draft. They're picking right at the end of the first round. So there's just less incredible guys available to you in the draft. They're still going to get some good players. But I think this will be the year we start to see the farm system not get worse, I wouldn't say, just comparatively not be so amazing that everybody's ranking it number one every single time. It's still going to be a great system. And maybe the pitching takes enough of a step forward, but I mean, there's also a world where someone like Chase McDermott even graduates this year as well because the Orioles need him. And I think that could push them down just barely a rung. Had 2 questions here about Cionel Pérez, just asking essentially, are we worried about Cionel Pérez and how he's performed this spring training? Again, spring training results aren't a big thing. And for Cionel Pérez, I've considered him one of the 4 bullpen locks for the entire offseason. It was a great 2022. It was a struggle in the first half last year, but he was maybe the Orioles' most reliable reliever at points in the second half of last season. I don't know if they would have won the division without him kind of turning things on. Now, yes, results-wise, spring training has not gone well. It's been 4 2/3 innings. It's been 7 runs on 11 hits, only 5 strikeouts to 2 walks, and 2 home runs allowed for Pérez. You don't want to see that results-wise. But again, I continue to talk about it is not about the results in spring training. It's about the process. It's about how they feel velo-wise, how they feel stuff-wise. The interesting part about Pérez, I don't even know if he's pitched in a televised or a stat-casted spring training game so far. So we haven't really gotten much data on how it's going for Cionel Pérez. We're just kind of getting these stat lines. I mean, he started his spring with giving up 4 runs in 1 inning. So that's going to inflate your ERA in the spring when you don't get that many outings. I think as long as the velo is there, and he is a guy who is susceptible to, if he's working on things, to give up more runs than your average pitcher in spring training because he's not a strikeout guy. Pérez plays with the sinker, the hard sinker. He plays for the ground ball. That could be contributing here a little bit. I want to see him. I don't think I've watched him pitch yet this spring, so I want to see that first, but very low level of concern for me at this point. Question from Chris here. If the Orioles were to trade for a reliever before opening day, who do you think they should trade for and who should they give up? Well, trying to pick out a reliever who's available in trade is almost impossible. Like, we know there's a couple of big names like, Kenley Jansen or Devin Williams, like 2, really good closers. Could they be available? But besides that, if you're trading for a reliever, you almost never know where the Orioles are going to find someone. Like, nobody talked at all about the Orioles trading for Shintaro Fujinami last year, and then they just did it. Like, some of the reliever trades just come out of nowhere, and especially ones that happen before opening day. Those ones are really crazy. I don't think the O's will go make like this big reliever splash, but here's how I see the O's getting a reliever. I would say one of 2 ways. If they feel like they're one reliever short, which you could argue they are. One way is the same way they picked up Danny Coulombe right before last season. That was a huge move. Coulombe doesn't make the Twins roster. He gets put on waivers, and a day before opening day, the Orioles send some cash over to Minnesota to get Coulombe. I mean, was he the 3rd best reliever last year for the O's? He might have been. Like, that was a huge pickup. So they will be scouring the waiver wire, scouring the guys who don't make the team. So it's a chance that the O's don't even add to the bullpen until like a day or 2 before opening day, and then they get a late pickup. The other way to add to the pen would be to go for someone who is a little more established, someone who's definitely going to make someone else's opening day roster if he's still there, maybe someone with more than just 1 year of control remaining, and using players like Ramon Arias, Kyle Stowers, maybe even Connor Norby if it's someone who has a really high upside, and trying to go get a reliever where, hey, this guy's not going to be on waivers. We got to give something up, but use the players where they're just in a similar Joey Ortiz situation where they're kind of just blocked from getting legitimate playing time. Or in Arias's case, he'll probably make the roster, but it would potentially help things if you could trade him for pitching. Now, Arias doesn't have like a lot of that. He is more valuable to the Orioles than he is to other teams, which makes it tough for him to trade. But for a guy like Stowers or Norby, you haven't seen the full picture of either of those guys at the big league level, so they have a little more value. I could see the O's going either way. It's just really tough to parse out like who could be out there because it's really anyone that any team is willing to talk about in their bullpen. This one from the Felix Express on Twitter, who asks, who do you think are the first 3 people to get extensions from the new owners, if any? I would say number 1 would be Adley Rutschman. I'm going to rule out any Scott Boras client extensions. He doesn't like to do them, especially this early in guys' career. So Gunnar Henderson, Corbin Burns, Jackson Holliday, I just don't think it's going to happen. But Adley Rutschman, that's got to be your number 1. Then I could see, depending on how open Bradish is to this, is a Kyle Bradish extension. Now, it would be a weird timing because he's dealing with the elbow issue, and we still don't know how serious it's going to be, whether or not he's going to need Tommy John surgery. But we could see a smaller extension there. And the third one I would look at is Anthony Santander. He is an impending free agent. I think of the Orioles' impending free agents, he is the most likely for the O's to bring back. And that is a guy you could see like a 2-3 year extension them go after. This question is from, and here's the Twitter name, Melvin Mora had a 155 OPS plus in 2004. Yes, he did. That is Falston, Maryland's own Melvin Mora, who does not get appreciated enough. I will pound the table for Melvin Mora. He does not get enough love as an Oriole. But the question is, Keegan Akin considerably underperformed his xFIP last year, which he did. He was bad, and he was much worse than he should have been if you look at the underlying numbers before he got the back injury in June and missed the rest of the season. Mike Baumann overperformed his expected FIP, which is also true. Mike Baumann, now more so in the second half than the first half, but in the first half as well, was probably pitching better ERA-wise than he was when you really dug deep into what he was doing. So the question is, who has the better shot at maintaining a long man job this year? Now, the first thing I'll say is, although Baumann and Akin did come up as starting pitchers, and when they both got to the majors, they were still starting pitchers. When Akin debuted in 2020, when Baumann got here in 21, like they were still starting pitchers and starting for the Orioles. They have since moved into the bullpen. There were points when those guys were long relievers. I don't think that's the case for either. I think for both Akin and Baumann at this point, they are short relievers. Now, the good thing about that is I think they are both guys who could give you 2 innings if you needed it out of the pen. But, say Cole Irvin exited in the 3rd inning of a game, I don't think the Orioles would give the ball to Keegan Akin and say, get us to the 6th or anything like that. I think that's beyond what Akin would do at this point. However, if we're going to just talk about who has a better shot of being an impact reliever for the Orioles this year, I think it's Baumann, just with how the stuff has looked. But with the way the Orioles talk about Keegan Akin, they like his riding fastball. The stuff's looked good in spring training. I actually think both Akin and Baumann, in my prediction right now, will make the opening day bullpen and play a significant role for this Orioles team. But we got a handful more of mailbag questions to get to. So going to do that coming up after the break, answer some more questions to finish off the pod. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Amazon Fire TV, they're the destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire Stick that you can just plug right into your existing TV and provides you access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV, including the sports you need. So whether it's the opening weekend for Major League Baseball, the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. And you want to check out all the channels they have, because you can watch March Madness, you can watch NBA, you can watch MLB, and so much more. So if you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this one. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. So we're back here. We'll get to a few more mailbag questions before this episode is over. This is a question from Connor, it looks like, and spelled correctly. Nicely done. Should the Orioles find a way to make room for Coby Mayo via another trade? And can you give us a prospect overview of Mayo, because he's not talked about as much as the other Orioles prospects? Well, Coby Mayo, 3rd-ranked prospect in the Orioles system, right-handed hitter with ridiculous power. I mean, ridiculous power. Like, best power in the system right now. It is insane how hard he consistently hits the ball and how far he can hit the ball when he hits majestic homers. Like, Coby Mayo is the one right-handed hitter where the wall being pushed back and raised in left field just doesn't worry me at all to impact him in the slightest bit. That's how good he is. Defensively, there's been questions. He is a third baseman by trade, but would he have to move to right field? Would he have to move to first base? Really good story by Andy Koska in the Baltimore Banner last week about Mayo, all of his improvements on his throwing from third base, how much better it's gotten. Orioles think he could now stick defensively at third base while still being able to play first and maybe being able to play right field if they need him to, which is nice to see. And a really good thing in the last year, walks went up, plate discipline got better, strikeouts went down, which is still going to be a part of his game, but they've gone down. It's just been huge improvements for Mayo. We're going to see him in the big leagues at some point this year. I don't know if they need to find room from opening day. I think most likely Mayo does start the year in AAA Norfolk, but I do think at some point this year, Mayo will take a Ramon Arias roster spot. Now, maybe it's Jackson Holliday eventually who takes an Arias roster spot if Holliday doesn't make the opening day roster, but at some point, Mayo is going to need to be here. Moving a player to get him space, I don't know. I mean, at some point, you're probably trading Arias. I don't know if it's Mateo's spot that Mayo would be taking over. It's maybe more of Ryan O'Hearn's spot, potentially. You're in a tough spot, but the O's are going to find a way, if Mayo's hitting in AAA, to get him to the big leagues this year. I think that's pretty self-explanatory at this point. Question from Nick, is there any chance Connor Norby gets the call with Jackson Holliday, Jordan Westburg, and Gunnar Henderson locking down the non-first base infield options? I'm going to tell you right now. Jackson Holliday's going to play second. Henderson's going to play short and third. Westburg's going to play third and second. And you'll have Mateo jumping in there a little bit for the Orioles. And for a bit this year, unless they trade him before opening day, you have Ramon Arias in that mix. You're going to have Coby Mayo is above Connor Norby in this infield conversation as well. Unless there is a significant injury to one of the Holliday, Westburg, not even Henderson, because he's more of a shortstop and third, really a major injury to the Holliday Westburg camp. That is the only way I see Connor Norby having any kind of impact more than coming up for a couple of games in the big leagues this year. And because he's not even on the 40-man roster yet, you still don't have to make that decision this year if you don't want to. Now, you could say, oh, what if the Orioles just trade Ramon Arias? Wouldn't that open things up for Connor Norby? Well, it might just open things up for Jackson Holliday. But there is a way to have Holliday and Arias both on the opening day roster. But if you even were to trade Arias then, or even if Arias were the one to get hurt, you would just fill in Ramon Arias' role with more Jordan Westburg playing more positions, more Jackson Holliday at second base, and you would probably just call up another outfielder. Say you had Hayes, Santander, Mullins, and Cowser as your four outfielders on the opening day roster. If Arias got traded, you would already have an extra infielder. So you just take away that extra infielder, and you would most likely give a roster spot to Heston Kjerstad at that point over Connor Norby. There's so many different ways where a guy gets hurt or traded where it's someone besides Norby who gets called up. And I feel bad for him because he's a major league talent. He's been hitting well in spring training. Brandon Hyde actually talked about it on Tuesday and was talking to the media, or it was either Monday or Tuesday, was basically saying yeah, he'd probably be a big leaguer in most other organizations. We just have so much talent here. And that's how it felt for Joey Ortiz. He did get a taste of the big leagues last year. It's feeling even more so that way for Connor Norby because he's not as good defensively as Ortiz was, which gave at least Joey a little leg up to get him to the big leagues. I feel bad for Connor Norby because he's a really fun player to watch. I love that draft pick. He was awesome in college to watch at ECU. I just don't think there's a spot for him. And I think the O's got to find a way to trade him, not just to trade him. You can keep him for longer in AAA. He's not going to like it, but you can. But if you can get some value, some big league value for him at the trade deadline, I would probably make a Connor Norby move. Question from Cody here. How long does Austin Hayes hold off Cowser, Kjerstad, and Stowers? This is a really good question. Austin Hayes is a free agent after 2025, which means he has 2 years of team control remaining before he becomes a free agent. We know how the last 2 years have gone for Hayes. Really good first half, disappointing second half, but still a solid major league player to have on your team. And I think the Orioles really like Austin Hayes. He has said, I want to get an extension. I don't see the Orioles giving him an extension. Just the way he plays, not good plate discipline, still a free swinger. He doesn't really fit the Orioles mold of player they want because they have so much talent. Cowser, Kjerstad, Stowers, eventually Beavers, Fabian, Enrique Bradfield, all these outfielders coming up through the system. At the very least, I think they just let Hayes walk after the 2025 season, but he could be moved out of that role before the end of 25. That could certainly happen. But Austin Hayes would really have to go in the tank this year for him to be like fully out of the lineup, reserved to a full bench role, or even like traded away or something, or DFA'd or whatever it may be after this offseason. Like, he's still a valuable enough player, really good in left field, knows how to play that new left field well at Camden Yards, can still get the big hit for you. Like, he would have to really tank. But I will say, let's have this conversation this time next year when Hayes only has 1 year of team control remaining. Then I think it gets really interesting, where he could be holding on by a thread, especially if any of Cowser, Kjerstad, or even Stowers have a big year in 2024. And then I will end this with a question from Phil, who asks, who are you most impressed with this spring, and who are you most concerned with? Now, it's tough to be concerned with guys. I would say the most concerned with is Kyle Bradish. I am concerned he won't pitch for the Orioles this year, and maybe not for part of next year because of Tommy John surgery. But in terms of guys on the field, I honestly feel like there hasn't been a lot of guys to be super concerned with. We talked about Cionel Pérez a little bit. I just haven't seen him pitch at this point. We talked about Julio Teheran struggling, but like, he wasn't anyone I had expectations with. Heck, he wasn't even in camp for a while with the Orioles. I would say most concern maybe goes to Jacob Webb. I feel like Webb, the season ended roughly for him after he came over on waivers in August, was dynamite for the O's bullpen for about a month. Then he faded a bit. Then he had the back-to-back home runs given up in the ALDS, and he's out of options. So, the Orioles might lean a little more towards giving him potentially the final bullpen spot. He's like right on the bubble. And he's another guy where the spring training just hasn't gone well for him results-wise. And I just feel like there's some good stuff in there for Webb, and we just maybe haven't seen it this spring. And it's disappointing for him because he's right on the bubble. You got to perform a little bit. But it's also disappointing because I feel like Webb has a higher ceiling, and I think this might end with him just being DFA'd before opening day and not getting an opening day roster spot. But the guy I've been most impressed with is Colton Cowser. I mean, that is the easy answer. I mean, he's got over 1,000 OPS in spring right now. He's been ridiculous answering questions. Again, it's not about all the results, but when you hit 115 in your first shot at the big leagues last year, when you have all that prospect promise and you're getting moved down prospect boards, and even me, I've said Kjerstad has taken over above him, and I'm still not sure if he can be an everyday center fielder defensively for Cowser. There's still questions. And we need to see it in a regular season in the big leagues. Like, I'm not going to say 1,000 OPS in spring is saying he's back, but it's been impressive what he's been doing. Like, I have a feeling, and again, it's not all about spring training results, but they certainly help. It just feels like we're moving towards Cowser making this opening day roster. And 3 weeks ago, I would have said that's not going to happen, but I think it's happening now, and it has a lot to do with the changes Cowser has made, and also maybe a little bit of the beard. I think the beard, the new haircut, I think it's helping him out. Why not? Give him a little more confidence. He's playing like he's got a lot of confidence in spring right now. But thank you all for your questions. That will do it for tonight's episode. We have a tentative plan for the next 2 episodes. It'll be fun. Now, the Wednesday episode is going to be similar to this one. Apologize for the recording schedule, but it will be an evening drop of the episode on Wednesday as well. But it looks like this week we're going to do something we've been doing for the past couple of years on the pod, which has been pretty fun. The guys from Orioles on the Verge, that would be Nick Stevens, Bob Phelan, and Zach Spedden, who host an amazing podcast that focuses on all things Orioles, but specifically their minor league system, a show that I listen to every week, and I recommend that you do as well. The 3 of them have been coming on the show during spring training over the last few years and doing a minor league player, basically prospect draft for the Orioles. We pick an entire team of prospects, an entire lineup, and most likely this year we'll do 3 starting pitchers and 1 reliever. And then we let you all vote on who drafted the best team, and then we follow it throughout the season. The only guidelines is the player is available to draft as long as he has not made his major league debut yet. So I think you can guess who's going to be the number 1 pick in this draft. But we'll start with part 1 of that draft, Wednesday's episode. Part 2 will be Thursday's episode. That's a tentative plan, but it looks like it's going to happen. So look forward to that on our next 2 pods, including when we're back again with a Wednesday evening drop of the podcast tomorrow. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.